thanks, organizer, for inviting me, and I hope you're enjoying the workshop. And today I will be presenting some work we did on techniques and metrics to mitigate evasion attack. As the introduction, I'm Bruno, professor at the Department of Information Engineering, Computer Science at the University of Trento. And some of the work I present today, especially the research part, is joint work with Professor Francesco Bergadano from the University of Turin in Italy and Sandeep Gupta from Queen's University, Belfast, UK. Okay, so this is the presentation outline. I will start presenting some basic concept in anomaly detection. My main area of research is cybersecurity, so I will illustrate many problems where we use machine learning. Then I will introduce some metrics that are classic metrics we use in anomaly detection, and also the important concept of the log curve. And these are the introduction of the concept to understand the second part of the presentation, where I will talk about adversarial machine learning, focusing mainly on one type of attack, that are the evasion attacks, explaining what is this type of attack, what are the adversarial example, and also explaining what is the state of the art, briefly, what is the state of the art in trying to mitigate this kind of attacks. Mainly talking about randomization and the important concept of key learning. And then in the final part, I will present some of the research work we are doing in this area. We propose a new metric called adversarial failure curves. I will explain you what is it and why we introduce it. And some new randomization technique that we evaluate them and they perform better than the state of the art. So let me start talking about the basic concept. Now, I don't know exactly what is the background of the audience, so I hope to essentially not to be too boring and to catch exactly what is the expectation of the audience. So, when we talk about machine learning and cybersecurity, this is not something new. This is something that we have been used for a very long time. There are many fields, many problems of cybersecurity that require the use of machine learning, of a classifier. For example, user authentication. So with user authentication, you have systems that are exact, so like password or the use of cryptographic key that do not require machine learning. But when for user authentication, you use biometrics, physiological, so you identify the correct user based on the fingerprint or the voice or the retina, or more recently with behavioral biometrics, where you try to profile the user based on how he behaves, how he type on the keystroke, how he move the mouse, how he interact with the smartphones. So that is then a classification problem. Typically, in this problem, a one-class classification where you want to distinguish the owner of the phone, for example, against all the others, but also can be an n-class classification. For example, you try to authenticate the user on an online banking application, and then the bank has a lot of customers, so you want to have to see if who try to log in is one of the many. And this is a typical problem when we employ machine learning. Another one that is very common, and it started in the 80s, is anomaly detection. So before anomaly detection, there was only signature-based intrusion detection, where essentially to defend against intrusion, you try to fingerprint the signature of the attack, and then you want to recognize that signature. Then anomaly detection in the 80s, another approach was proposed where instead of trying to capture the signature of the attack, and so this is reactive in nature as an approach, because you need to see the attack before you are able to detect it. Then people try to propose a proactive attack. This is anomaly detection, where you try to profile what is the correct behavior, and then all the other behavior that diverge enough from what you classify as a normal behavior is an anomaly. And this definitely is solved with employing machine learning. So you have different type of anomaly detection. This can be on a specific host, can be applied to network. So where you try to classify what is the legitimate traffic and what is an anomaly, so possible attack. Also in classifying the malware, classifier have been used, and another field where classifier have been used successfully is the spam filtering. So where there are several commercial tools that manage to classify with quite high accuracy if a mail is unsolicited, is a spam, or it's a legitimate mail. And more recently, the same methods, the same machinery is used to, for example, filtering the call, unsolicited call from legitimate call. So there are plenty of example where we deploy machine learning. These are all the security problems that can be casted as a classification problem. One class or n class, but then you use machine learning. Now, using machine learning, then there are several metrics that are important to consider. So let's see them, the main one. So first of all, in a typical security setting, you have two actors. The defender is a good guy, is the one that wants to protect the system, and the attacker that is trying to attack the system. And usually, and I will focus in the seminar mostly on the case of anomaly detection. You have let's consider the example of network intrusion detection. So you have a set of negatives. So these are the normal traffic, the traffic that is legitimate and should not raise any concern. And then you have a set of positives that are the anomalies, the one that you want to detect, because these are all traffic that should not reach your network, to your system, because is anomalous. Now, in practice, in many problems you have that n is much bigger than p. So you have a lot of normal data of negatives, while the positive are a very small subset. And this is not reflected in the picture simply because it would be difficult to have an n very large, but it's important to say. So the goal of the defender is trying to capture these positives, and as we said, usually does it by building using a classifier. Now the classifier is trying to capture the notion of what is an anomaly and what is a normal traffic, and you will never manage in practice to get a classifier that is exactly behave as the reality, but it approximates the reality. So that's why the yellow, that are the positives, what is considered the anomalies for the defender, do not coincide with the pink one, that are the real positives. But these are essentially the one considered the anomalies from the classifier of the defenders. And here it's important to introduce all the different cases. So you have FP. FP are the false positives. So are the one that the classifier of the defender see as anomaly, so raise an alarm, but they are not anomaly because they are normal trace, so they are negative. So these are the false alarm. Then there are the true positive. The true positive are the anomaly, so the one that the classifier of the defender capture as anomalies and the real anomalies, so that it's the good ones. And then the worrying one are the false negatives, so are the ones that are anomalies, but the classifier of the defender doesn't manage to catch. So they pass as a normal data, and these are the dangerous ones, because essentially are anomalies that pass through the system, so it's anomalous traffic that reach your system and your classifier doesn't manage to stop. And then there are the true negatives, so the real normal traffic that doesn't need to raise any alarm. And the objective of the defender is, of course, to try to minimize the false positive rate and to maximize the true positive rate. Other metrics that are also usually used is the confusion matrix. The confusion matrix report true positive, false negative, and true negative. And this is important because in a good classifier, you have that the value in this diagonal must be high. So essentially, the correct answer are most of the time the classifier issue the correct answer. While if the left diagonal are high, then the classifier is not good. As it's not good if you have numbers that are distributed in a strange way with high and low value. So essentially, you need to have this, the value of this diagonal to be high to have a good classifier. Then other well-known matrix are the accuracy, that is the correct answer over the total number of positive and negatives. So the true positive rate is called also recall sensitive orbit rate, that the true positive over the whole number of positives. So the anomalies that you capture over all the anomalies, and the false positive rate, that is the false alarm. So the one that you classify as a false positive over all the number of negatives. Then there is the precision, that is essentially how many times when the classifier says that it's an anomaly, that it's a correct answer. That is given by then the true positive over true positive plus the false positive. The specificity, that is given by the number of true negative over false positive and plus true negatives. That is essentially it's one minus it's equivalent to 1 minus the false alarm. And many times you can also see the F measure and the F1 score defined in that way. And these are, yes, probably all of you know the typical matrix that are used when you use a classifier. Another important matrix that I want to introduce because it will be useful for the rest of the talk is the receiving operating characteristic. This is the rock space. It's an important representation because you can see the behavior of the classifier and also compare different classifiers. So it's representing how the classifier works, representing the true positive rate over the false positive rate. Okay? On the y-axis you have the true positive rate, on the x-axis you have the false positive rate, and then important point to explain here is if you have 1, this is the perfect classifier because essentially we managed to capture all the true positives. So this is when the yellow ball that we saw before coincide with the pink one. While this is a very bad one, if you classify FPR equal to 1, because it means that always issue false positive. 0 is a classifier that it doesn't raise any alarm. So this is the one that always raise false alarm. This is the one that never raise an alarm. Interesting is the point in the diagonal. These are the case where when you see, for example, some traffic, then it's equivalent to establish if it's anomaly or not, it's equivalent to toss the coin. So you have 50% chance of classifying one or the other. So definitely you want your classifier to belong on this area, while if they belong to this area, so you have this kind of behavior, then the classifier is pretty useless because perform less than the random choice. Why the rock space is useful, we will see now. But let's see. Most of the classifier do not output directly anomaly or normal traffic, positive or negatives, but most of them output a floating point, a real number, a score. And then you need to interpret that score. And how we usually do that? Essentially by using a threshold. So you can transform a threshold classifier in a discrete classifier, fixing a threshold. So when you see a sample, E, you apply your classifier, the classifier output a score. If the score is greater or equal to the threshold, then that is classified as an anomaly. And let's see some example. Oh, okay, we'll see some example. Just to mention here that we have the threshold. When you have the threshold, what is the effect of the threshold? If you have a smaller threshold, means that this yellow box get bigger, and getting bigger, you have a positive effect because TP get bigger, grows, so you capture more true positive, but also the false positive grows. And that is bad in the sense that then you have more false alarm. And that's why it's important, as we'll see, to choose the threshold where you find the right balance between true positive and false positives. And you can do that with the rock curves. We can see. This is an example. You have a classifier here that outputs some score. You have 20 instances. 10 are anomalies, so +1, and 0 are normal traffic. You see, if we fix the threshold to 0.4, so all the value, all the score that are greater or equal to 0.4 should be classified as anomaly. And you capture in this way 7 out of the 10 anomalies. So you have a 70% of true positive rate. At the cost of some false positive, because you can see also that these are classified as normal traffic, while they should be positive, so they should be considered as anomaly. So you have 40% of anomaly. And this is give you how the classifier behave with the threshold 0.4. Then you can shift and change and see what happens if I change the threshold. So For example, with the threshold 0.35, I can see that I capture one more true positive, so the true positive rate increased from 70% to 80%, but at the cost of a much higher false positive rate, because it's true that I get one more true positive, but I get 4 more false positive compared before. So you have this point. And the idea is that you can vary the different value of threshold and see, you build a set function, you see how the classifier works. And this is this is useful to know essentially how to fix the threshold based on the TPR and FPR that fit your application. You can do this for all the possible thresholds from 0 to 1, and you obtain a curve that is monotonic, because the TPR always increase with the decrease of the threshold. Now, the ROC curve is it's interesting, because then with a single curve, you can also compare different classifiers. Because you can see here the ROC curve for 2 different classifiers, the yellow and the red, that give you the behavior of the classifier changing the different threshold. And this is important because different from other metrics, it's a matrix that allows you to compare classifier, and this is important to have such a matrix. And actually, you can even distill the comparison to a single value if you use the area under curves, where essentially you estimate you calculate the area under the curve, and you get a single value that can compare the performance across the different thresholds of the entire classifier with respect to other classifier. Okay, so this is the ROC curve and the area under ROC curve. Now, this was the introduction, and now we can pass. Okay, now there is also here some examples. So this is an example of the ROC curve for a simple case of classification of normal digit, where 3 is considered anomaly, and you can see the different performance using 3 different classifiers, in this case random forest, the multi-layer acceptor, and the k-enable. Okay, so after this introduction, let me pass to explain a bit more about the adversarial machine learning, so the attack. We were using machine learning for a long time in support of cybersecurity, but 15-20 years ago, people realized that machine learning could be applied also to attack the security solution. And people start more and more trying to see how you can attack the classifier in order to bypass security and to make a security solution to work in the wrong way. And as also the implementation of this classifier became more popular, essentially more and more people work on this area, and there is now quite a body of work on adversarial machine learning, and we can, broadly speaking, classify this attack in 2 classes. The attack that try to attack the classifier learning time, and this is where the attacker try to manipulate the training data. These are called data poisoning. So the attacker try to inject or disrupt the learning of the classifier. And for example, the attacker managed to insert in the training data some attack pattern, then this anomaly, this attack, will not be detected during test time. And there is quite a lot of work in the attack, the data poisoning attacks. Actually, there is more work in this area rather than the other possibility. You can attack the machine learning classifier at test time, essentially with what they are called the evasion attack. So you select an attack pattern that will not be detected as such by the defender. So you try to get one of these false negatives that were pink but not yellow, so that they are anomalies that are not detected by the classifier of the attack. And these are called the evasion attack. And the rest of the talk I will focus more on evasion attack. With the evasion attack, as I said, what is the objective of the adversary? Essentially is to evade attack. It doesn't touch the training set, so it will not operate during the training, but it will operate at inference time. And it can do the evasion trying two strategy. One is to find out a false negative, because select one of the false negatives that get undetected by the classifier of the defender, or also modify some instances of the test set that are anomaly, but by changing them, they come to be undetected by the classifier. And these are the adversarial examples. And an important paper in this area is this paper from Goodfellow and others. Goodfellow is quite important in the area of adversarial machine learning because he did a lot of work on attacks, both on test time and running time. And this is an interesting paper where they explain what is the adversarial examples. So these are input to machine learning models that an attacker has intentionally designed for the model to make a mistake, so to misclassify. And also shows some method of how to find them, and show also that it's not difficult to build this adversarial example. And one of the paper showed this example that you can see here, where you have a classifier that essentially classifies normal images, the one of the monkey, and anomalies are all the picture of the other animals. So you have a panda. The panda is considered an anomaly, so the classifier raise an alarm to show that this is the panda is not a monkey. Then, by introducing this noise to the image, at the naked eyes you can still see a panda, but the classifier see this as a gibbon, so as a monkey, and it will not raise an anomaly. And so the evasion attack, that is the goal. Essentially, find some anomaly that are not classified as such by the classifier of the defender, so you can attack the system without detection. Let me explain what is the threat model in this case. You have, as I said, a defender that wants to defend the system, so when you receive some traffic, you will evaluate if it's normal traffic or it's an anomaly. And in many cases, you put the system available to third party, subscriber, external parties, so the system can be used by external parties, so it can be used also by the adversary. So the adversary can send sample, so it doesn't interfere with the construction of the classifier, with the training of the classifier, but it can use the classifier at test time. He sends a sample, and then he can observe if the sample is sent raise an alarm or not. This is useful information because then you can try to infer the behavior of the classifier of the defender. Classifier of the defender, when it's trained, has a lot of parameters, a lot of input that are important, because even if the algorithm is the same, by changing this input, you have different trained classifier. And these are the training data, the hypothesis space, so the rules that try to classify the target, bias, parameter, feature selection. These are all elements that the attacker does not know. And he wants to infer, and he can infer by simply submitting a lot of testing sample and then observing the output. Because the adversary has a goal as the way of building a classifier that is the same of the defender. If you manage to do that, then he can easily find adversarial example, as we learned from Goodfellow. So what is important here is that the defender has to do as much as possible to make his own classifier different from the classifier of the attacker, or better. He cannot act on the classifier of the attacker, but he wants to make his classifier unpredictable, so the attacker does not know what classifier to build. He can try to build one, but it's likely to build one that is different of the one of the defender. More different it is, better it is for the defender, because then it will be difficult for the adversary to find correct adversarial examples. Now, this is a problem that is already known. It's not something that we discover now, and people essentially suggested some approach to solve this problem. And the most promising and effective approach is the randomization one. So essentially the idea is to inject randomization in the model such that the attacker doesn't know exactly how the model works. And this randomization can be introduced at learning time or at testing time. At learning time, these are some of the most important papers that you can see reference here that propose randomization. So some paper propose to put randomization in the training set, because the common assumption is that the attacker knows the training data set, but he doesn't know which subset you may use in order to train your learning, because you don't need to use the entire training set. You may use some specific and some smaller subset, and different subset learn different classifiers. So if you know exactly what is the training subset, then it's difficult for you to reconstruct the correct, the same classifier. Some other paper suggest to keep secret the feature selection or the initial weight in case of a neural network. Other approach, essentially the one assuming the use of multiple classifier or ensemble learning, essentially put some randomness in the way in which you for example, select the tree in a random forest in ensemble learning, or the weighted on a random forest. So there is a lot of parameters that you can randomize and make difficult for the attacker to know them. All these techniques are quite effective because they make the evasion attack much harder, because it's true that they hide the characteristic of the classifier of the defender. Of course, this is typically as a time limit in the sense that, however, if the attacker managed to use a lot of samples and a lot of test samples, then he learn a bit more and more every time about the defender classifier. So he might not be able to replicate the exact classifier, but he get close. Then the other approach is, instead of putting randomization learning time, you put randomization at the test time. And there are two approaches. One is that is general, you have the bounded random noise. So essentially, if you have a binary classifier, from time to time you flip the classification, randomly flip the classification, giving a wrong result. And this definitely confuses the attacker because the result is wrong. But and with the threshold classifier, you do something similar. You add a random value to the score, and then you have the wrong classification. It's true that this add good randomness in the system, but what you pay here is the accuracy, because of course the accuracy decreases. The other possibility is if you use, for example, ensemble learning, is to select a random sample sample. So, for example, if you use bagging, essentially you select randomly the subset of tree that you use for the decision. The problem with this is usually it's you pay in terms of efficiency, so the decision take longer time. Now, more recently, people came with this idea of randomization using keys. And this is a quite interesting concept. It was first introduced by these two papers for the specific case of intrusion detection. And then Bergadano, in this paper, generalized the idea for any application. And here, what is the idea is that you generate a key, a bit like the key dash function. So you generate a key, and this key selects all these parameters that we saw can vary at the training time. So you have a trained classifier that depends on the key. And what you keep secret is the key. And the key is used in order to select, as I said, many of these parameter and configuration settings that are important and make the classifier very different. So, for example, you can use the key to select the training sample, the size of the training sample, which model to use, the parameter, the other parameter, the hypothesis. So all these variables essentially are selected based on the key. And changing the key, essentially you can retrain the classifier. Okay. This is the state of the art, and now we pass on the third part of the talk, where I tell you what we did new, starting from what is the state of the art and what I just described. In particular, we have introduced a measure for evasion resistance. So what is the problem? We would like to have a matrix that tells us how a classifier, how robust is the classifier against evasion attack. This is useful because if you want to use a classifier, it would be nice for you to have a measure that say this classifier is more robust to the evasion attack than this other one. Such a metric doesn't exist. So we propose one. Then we propose some method to mitigate the evasion based on Q-learning and moving target defense. And I will explain. And then if I have time, I'll also show you the result. We evaluated this technique that we introduced with some real intrusion detection data set, and they seem to outperform what are the existing technique of mitigating evasion attack. But let's start. Okay, so let's start with the matrix, and let me recall what is also the threat model here we assume. There are here in the slide I showed two extremes. You have a white box. White box is where you assume that the adversary knows the training data, the learning algorithm, and the learned classifier, so the trained classifier. If that is the situation, you cannot defend against the evasion attack, because the adversary is always able to generate adversarial example. So you can defend against evasion attack if you don't use the white box scenario. We also don't want to use the black box assumption. The black box assumption is where the attacker knows the training data, but it doesn't know the algorithm and the learned classifier. This is too much, because usually the attacker always manages to infer the algorithm. So assuming that the algorithm is secure, its secret is a bit like security through obscurity. So also this threat model is not realistic. So the one we assume here is this one. So the only things that the attacker does not know is the key. Okay, it's a bit like a cryptographic algorithm. In the cryptographic algorithm, the algorithm is known to the attacker. What the attacker doesn't know is the key, and here is the same. You know the learning algorithm, but you don't know the key. And the key is the one that decides, as we say, all those parameters that produce the learned classifier. Different parameters really generate a different classifier, that they behave different. So it's important to keep the key secret. Okay, so this is the assumption of classifier against evasion attack. All the existing work, because there is a lot of work presenting some evasion attack, they evaluate the problem from the attacker point of view. So for example, they attack a system, a classifier, and then they have a metric that express how much effort or what was the cost of the attacker to attack the system. This is not very useful for you if you want to deploy a system and to defend, because you don't want a matrix that depends on the attacker. You would like to have a statistical matrix that is general. It's a bit like here, the same of cryptographic algorithm again. In a cryptographic algorithm, you have a statistical evaluation of the strength of the cryptographic system based on the length of the key. So you know that bigger is the key, usually better is the security of the cryptographic algorithm. Of course, the attacker can find out the key through some shortcut. So by luck, or because he bribed the security management guy and he revealed the key, or because the key is not stored in a correct way of the system. But these are all shortcuts that are not useful for you when you want to decide a cryptographic algorithm, to decide which one is the strongest one. Then you would like to have a statistical measure, and then all this problem of this shortcut can be solved through the system setting, the configuration of the system. And here is the same. We would like something similar to this, and there isn't. And also, the work that exists do not consider, usually work on discrete classifier, not considering that a lot of classifier threshold. So we would like to have something for the adversarial, for the evasion attack similar to the ROC curve. And that is what we propose. So let me try to explain what we propose. Now, let's go back to the matrix that we introduce. As we said, we have negatives, positive, and then we have the positives according to the defender, right? Now, the attacker built his own classifier. And as we said, we keep the classifier of the defender unpredictable. So the classifier of the attacker, it never coincides with PD, but it diverges. It diverges, and so has a set of positives that are different from the set of positives captured by the classifier of the defender. And here the important points are the non-false negatives, this one. These are the false negatives for the classifier of the defender that are also false positive for the classifier of the attackers. So the attackers know that these are false positives, and these are the dangerous ones, because these are anomalies that work also for the classifier of the defender. And then there are the unknown true positives. So these are the true positives for the defender, for the classifier of the defenders, that are not true positive for the classifier of the attacker. So the attacker may choose this as anomaly that go undetected, but they actually raise an alarm. They get detected by the defender classifier. Okay, so this is the situation. And so what is the assumption of the attacker? The attacker assumes that his classifier is similar to the one of PD, then select one point between KFN and UTP, and submit to the system, and to see if it gets undetected. So you take an anomaly that can be from the known false negative or the unknown true positive, and submit to the system. If the anomaly belongs to the known false negatives, this goes undetected and the evasion attack succeeds. Then we can compute what for each attacker of for each classifier, what is the adversarial failure rate. So what is the rate of success or failure of the attacker in selecting the adversarial example that works. Because this adversarial failure example, in case the FN and the UTP are empty, so there are no anomalies there, it's always 1. So this is the case where you cannot find an adversarial example. Or the rate is given by the unknown TP, so the one that if the adversary selects will be stopped, over the number of all this plus the one that passed through. This is the way in which we compute the adversarial failure rate. And this is for a single point, but we can build then also a curve for the adversarial failure rate. So to have something similar to the ROC curve also for the AFR. So it's the same. So we have this notion of adversarial failure rate space similar to the ROC curve space, where you have the adversarial failure rate over the false positive rate. And again, this is a perfect case because a perfect defense against an adversarial attack, because this is the case where the adversary never managed to select an anomaly that gets undetected. Well, this is bad for the defender because there are false alarm and the adversary always win. So also here, you varying the threshold, you can see how the adversarial failure rate change, and bigger is the adversarial failure rate, better is the defense against evasion attack. So you can have curves like that. So here you can see in this diagram that there is the traditional ROC curve. So these are true positive rate over false positive rate, the orange one. They give you the ROC curve for this random forest classifier, while this is the FER curve that tells you how this random forest classifier is robust against evasion attack. So for example, you compare these two classifiers, you can see that until a certain threshold, the random classifier performs much better, and then the multi-layer perceptron actually outperform the other. So the idea is that we can compare different hello?
Yes, Professor, we can still hear you.
Okay. Sorry, let's see. We can compare the different classifier with respect to their robustness against evasion attack. Okay, so this is the matrix. Then, as we said, we also propose a technique to make classifier more robust with this key randomization. Like normal randomization, also with key randomization, you can add, you can use the key learning time and test time. We leave for future work the test time, and we focus on finding some technique for the learning time. And here we propose two techniques. The first one is this training set size pinning. So essentially, we use ensemble learning, and for each of the classifier, we want to set the optimal training set size. Optimal in which respect? Optimal in this sense, as is shown here by this graph. Optimal in the sense that it gives you the best FR, so the best defense against evasion attack, and still has acceptable accuracy. And we compute the pin size inductively in this way. We start from this point. This point means that we consider the full training set. Okay, 0, 0 means that all the training set is used to train the classifier. And we see what is the value of the FR. And you can see the FR start to increase as we decrease the size of the training set. And we have the optimal value around 30% of the training set. So you get the training set, you reduce. When you get 30%, you get this peak that is almost 85% of the FAR, and then it drops again. So this is the best size in terms of FR. We also consider the work curve, because we want also to see, by selecting this threshold for, it's good for robustness against evasion attack, what is the effect on accuracy. Because you can see that we have an impact on the accuracy, but the accuracy is still 95%. If this is considered to be acceptable, then this is the optimal pin size. And then once we have the optimal size of the subset for training. When we have that, then we use that size to train all the classifier. So this is one way to introduce randomness. The other one is through the model matrix. So essentially, instead of having a fixed classifier, the classifier of the defender can be selected among a choice of different classifier. And we have matrix 3 by 3, but the matrix can be bigger. And these are chosen at random according to the value of the key. And the adversary doesn't know the key, so it doesn't know what is the strategy or the learning algorithm. And the adversary can only guess. And this number is the adversarial failure rate. Of course, you have the worst failure rate in the diagonal, because in the diagonal means that the adversary chose exactly the same classifier used by the defender. So he guessed the algorithm. But still, you may have a good adversarial failure rate, because it's true that, for example, you have chosen random forest, and the random forest is the same classifier of the defender. But there are many parameters that still the adversary doesn't not know, that makes still the classifier quite robust against evasion attack. And there is also the possibility to combine the two techniques, so both training set side pinning and model matrix. Then we add yet another feature, and the fact that, as we said, with the randomization, you can obfuscate, hide how your classifier works, but as the attacker try many test cases, at the end you will get closer to the correct behavior of your classifier. You manage to get a classifier that is closer to the one the defender is used. In order to address also this problem, we introduce this element of moving target defense, because we, by monitoring the result of the classifier, we see if the classifier of the attacker gets close to the defender, and when he gets too close, essentially we refresh the key. We refresh the key and we generate we go for again, the defender goes again for a new training, and we generate a new classifier. A new classifier, and then the attacker has to start again from the scratch. So this is called moving target defense, because again, with this key we can simply, by refreshing the key, refresh all the parameters and recompute a new classifier for the defender. We implemented this. The implementation is available if you want to play with it. And then we test it with some data set coming from into detection. So we tried with BET and Kyoto. These are two data sets. They have several millions of entries generated by Onepot. So with intrusion, so are quite probably the best data set available in literature. And the BET is also not not so old. And with the BET, we tested the out of sample and in sample. Out of sample means that the test set is drawn from a completely different distribution, while in sample means that we took the test set and we used 10% for training and 90% for testing and without changing the distribution. While with the Kyoto, we had only the in-sample one, and these are the result compared to some existing method. So the green one is the adversarial failure rate of the method that use the model matrix and the training data size with the different size binning, while the blue is inserting randomization at test time, and the orange is the random forest, where essentially you select randomly some parameter of the random forest, and you can see that in some case the post-learn randomization performs better than the random forest. In some other case, like in the Kyoto, the random forest performs better than the post-randomization, but in all cases, our technique is much more robust against evasion attack, so as an EFR that is higher than the other two. And these are interesting and promising results, because they essentially saw that this technique tried to provide a better resistance to evasion attack compared to what is the state of the art. And we are now also working on completing and making more exhaustive experiment to attest this one. And in order to compare the different classifier, we use the AFR, so the matrix that we just introduced. Okay, so just to conclude this part, as I said, we introduced this new measure for evasion resistance, also some method based on kill learning to add randomization at the learning time on the classifier. And as I say, the early experimental results seems to be positive and good for the use of these new methods. And with this, I close the seminar. I hope you managed to hear me, and if you have any questions, just let me know.
Thank you very much, Professor Bruno. So I would open the floor to the participant for Q&A. Or any participant online who would like to have questions, please raise your hand or unmute yourself or type in the chat box.
Anyway, just in case, you can see that I left there some links, also the work we did, and feel free to send me some mail or some question also over email. The next days I will answer.
Ciao Bruno, this is Sandro. How are you? Good?
Yes.
So I'm just wondering in which kind of systems we can deploy this kind of solution. I mean, is this orthogonal and can be deployed also in embedded systems, or this is just more a solution that is applied on the server scale or high performance computing?
In principle, okay, this is a general framework, so it's not specific for embedded system compared to server. I think this is simply a way which you can use the classifier And if you have a classifier that already works for in embedded system, I think that you can add this element of randomness. Of course, sample learning it's expensive in the sense that depend on which device you are talking about. But yes, it's not. The framework and the concept can be applied to any setting, any environment. Of course, what I presented tend to be classifier, expensive classifier in terms of performance, memory. So probably it would be difficult to implement them in a very constrained, resource constrained device.
Yeah, clear. And the follow-up question is related to the keys, and I think you did a nice analogy in comparing like the cryptography with this kind of approach. So my question, and I was wondering if the same techniques that can be used to protect keys in cryptography can be also used here. I mean, TEs in general or whatever. What is your take on that?
Yes, you can put that. It's true that you use the key only during training. Then you don't use the keys anymore. The question is that you cannot expect to keep the training data set hidden, so that is usually something that the attacker knows. And the attacker knows also the learning algorithm, so he may know which classifier are you using. But what is clear from the work we did is that while this is not emphasized in the literature, it's very important to keep some the parameters secret. So if you don't have something secret when you deploy the system, there is no way in which you can protect your system from evasion attack. And this is a first, I think, a general point. The other good point, and we are working that on that direction, is that this paper from Godfella, it's also state that adversarial example are transferable, independent from which architecture and which classifier you use. And all the experiment we did, okay, it doesn't prove that, but it states a conjecture that is almost given for granted in the field, that adversarial example transfer. So if I found an anomaly that gets detected for a classifier, even if you change the classifier, it works. It still work, and that is doesn't for us. That doesn't apply, because if you put enough randomness, essentially that is not true. And this is also, I think, an important work if we manage to show that that statement that seems to be accepted by the community is not true.
Okay, thank you.
Of course, I would have liked to join you, but this time it was not possible. So I hope you will.
Thank you so much, Professor Bruno. Does anyone have any further questions? Oh, yes.
Professor Bruno. Thank you for that informative presentation. And for the purpose of literature review and proper citation, could you please let us know whether the research, studies, and system architecture related to the keyed randomization and framework you discussed are publicly available? And if so, could you please share?
Yes. We have a paper there, and one reference is already in the slide, one that introduced the kid learning. We have a paper that has been published reporting the work I reported, and we are now revising the version for the journal. So I can definitely add the reference in the slide. So I will send to the organizer the final version of the slide, and I will include the references. And as I say, if later on any of you want to know more about that, feel free to contact me. That's why you have my email in the slide. We're very happy somebody is interested and want to investigate more on that direction.
Yes, we will take one more last questions before the break. So does anyone have any question for Professor Bruno? It seems that no further questions, Professor. So thank you very much once again for the detailed techniques and the metrics. So let's give a round of applause for Professor Bruno.